Alright guys, so I told you we finished, but we have a sneak peek of the next book in the series because they haven't solved it yet. They still have things to find. So the next book is called Keepers of the School, Fear Itself. And then I'm going to read a little bit from that one. And then The Whites of Their Eyes. And then number 4, there's 5. That one is In Harm's Way. And the last one is We Hold These Truths. So, we are going to finish this one, and they give us the first chapter-ish of the next book, which is this one, which is called Fear Itself. So, let's see. Hero to Zero is what it's called. Benjamin Pratt had some serious detective work to do. So his plan was to be invisible all day long, to do nothing that would draw attention to himself. He was going to glide around the Captain Oaks school like a ghost, observing, examining, analyzing. He had a fresh pack of index cards for organizing his notes, and he'd brought his good digital camera, a tiny thing, not much bigger than a pack of gum. He also had a flashlight and a 12-foot tape measure, secret agent stuff. But the invisibility wasn't happening today. Not today. Ben, way to go! Hey, Pratt, saving Garrett and everything? Amazing. Before he got to his homeroom on Monday, he'd been high-fived 4 times and had been called a hero, the champ, Mr. Lifeguard, and Aquaman. True, he had in fact dived into the choppy ocean to help Robert Garrett after the guy flipped his sailboat during their race on Saturday, but only because he'd been right there when it happened. What, was he supposed to just watch a kid drown? When a crowd of reporters had gathered at his mom's house Saturday evening with lights and cameras, she had scolded them off her lawn. Ben didn't have any more to say about it. Another boy had been in trouble, and her son had helped out. That was all. But Robert had plenty to say. Propped up in a hospital bed with a bandage wrapping his head, he had talked to everybody. The incident was called Rescue at Sea on one Boston TV station and Escape from Death on another. A colorful news story both Saturday and Sunday. To Ben's surprise, Robert had actually given him some credit. Looking straight into the camera, he'd said, "Yeah, if it hadn't been for Ben, I might not have made it." However, Robert had also said, "But the worst part, it happened just as I was about to win my first big sailing race of the year." Typical. And today, with everyone treating Ben like a celebrity, he didn't see how he'd get to do much exploring, which was too bad. He really needed some fresh ideas. All weekend, he had been chewing on the clues he and Jill had found on Friday, clues that were supposed to help them find stuff. Stuff that would somehow keep their school from being torn down. That would somehow keep the Glenley Entertainment Group from building their massive theme park on the harbor. That would somehow keep the whole town of Edgeport from turning into a huge neon tourist trap. That was the mission, and it seemed impossible. Plus, completely crazy. After the final bell clanged for homeroom, everyone stood up and recited the Pledge of Allegiance. And then the principal began reading the announcements. But Ben couldn't think about anything except those clues. They ran through his mind for the 100th time. After 5 bells sound, time to sit down. After 4 times 4, tread up 1 more. After 3 hooks pass, 1 will be brass. After 2 tides spin, a man walks in. After 1 still star, horizons afar. He had called Jill twice on Sunday and again this morning before school to ask if she'd made any progress. "Give it a rest, Benjamin. I know we need a breakthrough, but, like, what are we looking for? And where are we supposed to start? And what could we possibly find that would actually stop these people? The Glenlee Group has spent $35 million. They own the school. And on June 18th, they're going to rip it down. I've got to eat breakfast. Goodbye. She'd sounded angry, discouraged too, which wasn't like her. Ben couldn't figure it out. Jill had been rock solid last Friday, and she'd seemed great when he'd seen her after the sailboat race on Saturday, so something must have happened over the rest of the weekend. But what? He had no idea. Whatever was bothering her, it wasn't good, because Ben was pretty sure that without Jill's help on this, they might as well go ahead and buy the cheap lifetime passes that Tall Ships Ahoy had advertised in Sunday's Boston Globe. But he'd see Jill in third period math for sure, and maybe he'd have something figured out by then. Or at least have an idea about what to do next. Maybe she just needed to feel like they were making some real progress. Ben was ready to try anything to cheer her up a little. Ms. Wilton took attendance, then laid out the week's schedule. When she finished, there were still about 10 minutes before first period, so Ben got out a pencil and a blank index card and started thinking. He thought about the copper plate he and Jill had found in a secret compartment on the 3rd floor, a message hidden there by the first keepers of the school back in 1791. One particular sentence about Captain Oakes in that message jumped out at him. He prepared 5 safeguards to help us in our self-defense. Ben wrote the word safeguards on the card. Maybe Jill was right. Maybe Captain Oakes was just a rich weirdo who wanted lots of attention. The kind of guy who would stick his own grave in the middle of a school playground. No, Ben was already sure there was something more to all this. He thought about the message stamped on the gold coin Mr. Keene had given him, and then wrote 2 more words on the index card. Attack and defend. Those were military terms, which made sense. After all, Captain Oakes was a captain, a man of action, the guy in charge. He had commanded one of his own ships in the American Navy during the Revolutionary War. Ben stared at the 3 words he'd written and tried to imagine being a sea captain, being responsible for a large ship and the life of every person on it. The captain would have to oversee everything. His ship would sail thousands of miles, spend months at a time on the high seas. The captain would have to account for every barrel of water, every sack of flour, every yard of canvas, every musket and cannonball, every ounce of gunpowder, every length of rope. So Captain Oakes wasn't some goofball. He must have been an amazing thinker, an incredible long-range planner. And as the captain was converting his warehouse into this school, it was like he was outfitting a ship for a trip, the long voyage into the future. And he was certain there would be dangers. Ben remembered the old book the librarian had found for him and what he'd read about the Captain Oakes. The captain, Oakes, had been very old by then, so he knew he wouldn't be around to command his new ship himself. If it ever came under attack, his officers would have to fight the enemy on their own. But if he planned carefully and left the right kind of weapons, safeguards, then his ship and his crew would survive. And who did the captain enlist as the commanders for his most important ship? He's talking about the school. The school janitors. Ben smiled. That was pure genius. To choose steady, professional caretakers to defend his school, to carry that gold coin with their captain's instructions on it, and down through the years, each janitor had been responsible for finding his own replacement, someone trustworthy. And the captain's plan had worked perfectly from 1783 right up to last Thursday. Except now, there wasn't a reliable janitor, which was why Mr. Keene had given the coin to Ben. So I'm the new commander, he thought, and his smile got bigger. But it faded as he thought about Mr. Keene. Just hours after handing the coin to Ben, he had died. And he had warned Ben about his assistant janitor, Lyman. He's a snake. Worse than a snake, thought Ben. He was a spy, working for the company that had bought the school after they'd figured out how to get around the captain's last will and testament. Lyman was a big problem. Ben? He looked up to see his homeroom teacher holding out her hand, and he took a slip of paper from her. I almost forgot. Mrs. Sinclair wants to see you in the library before first period. Oh, okay. He tucked the index card in his pocket and stood up. And Ben, I heard about what you did this weekend. I'm proud of you. Thanks, he said, beginning to blush. But really, I was just the closest one to the accident. Well, said Mrs. Wilton, I'm proud of you anyway. We all are. And there were nods of agreement from the kids around him. Ben smiled awkwardly, his face bright red now. He grabbed his book bag and rushed out the door. So much for being invisible. The library was on the opposite corner of the first floor, and as he walked through the quiet hallway, Ben knew why Mrs. Sinclair wanted to see him. He and Jill were doing a big social studies project, a report about the history of the Oaks School, which would give them extra time in the building to search for the stuff the captain had left behind, the safeguards. A brilliant plan. His brilliant plan. Except Robert Garrett had butted his way into the project, so that would be a drag. And a complication. One more among a jillion others. Ben shook his head. This whole thing was crazy. In less than a month, the school was scheduled for demolition, and 2 kids were supposed to stop it all by themselves? But Ben caught himself, made himself stop thinking that way. He was sounding like Jill. And if they both got discouraged, that really would be the end. He had to keep fighting. Still, it all seemed pretty insane. When he walked in from the hallway, Mrs. Sinclair saw him. She nodded toward the glass-walled workroom over in the center of the library. I'll be with you in a minute, Ben. The library was his favorite place in the old school, so he was glad to have a moment to just sit and look around. It was a large space, and the high ceiling made it feel open and airy. Dark oak bookshelves ran along all 4 walls of the main room. The shelf edges had been carved to look like thick rope, and the panels along the top of each unit also had been decorated. Some of the carvings showed scenes of ships at sea, complete with waves and clouds and flapping flags. There were carvings of small New England farms and busy seaports, and Ben's favorite showed a large deer standing on a wooded hillside. The designer of the room had added 3 shallow alcoves, which broke up the boxy feeling of the long shelves. Centered on the north, east, and west walls, each alcove, it's just like a little section that's back away from the rest of the walls. Each alcove had a dark oak table and comfy cushioned benches. Wide leaded glass windows facing east and north let in lots of daylight. Even though the center area had been updated with modern tables and chairs and computer workstations, the original flavor of the room had survived. The place smelled like time. Looking around, Ben's thoughts drifted again to Captain Oaks and the safeguards he and Jill had to find. He was glad the library was going to be sort of like the command center for their project, a place they could come before and after school. And since he and Jill would need to make lots of drawings and take lots of photos for the report, they would be able to wander around the school pretty much whenever they wanted to. At least, that was the plan. His brilliant plan. Mrs. Sinclair came into the workroom and stood in front of him. He looked up with a smile, which disappeared when he saw her face. The book is missing, Ben. The one you used on Friday. Her voice was flat and cold. I took it off the reference shelf for you, and you promised to be careful with it. But this morning, Ms. Schubert noticed it wasn't there. Ben felt his throat tighten, felt his face start to get hot. But I... She held up a hand. No, let me finish. I haven't talked about this with Mr. Telmer or with anyone else. I wanted to speak to you first. If for some reason you misunderstood me and you took that book out of the library, then you can simply return it. And as long as it isn't damaged, that will be the end of this. All right? She looked him in the eye. Now, what do you have to say? That's the first part of the next book, so you get to decide if you want to check the next book out, maybe. So you can read it and see what happens. Do you think Ben took that book out of the library? It told us earlier he put it back on the shelf, so... Mysteries. All the mysteries.